Welcome to Stereo 3D Productions and this first impressions video of the PlayStation VR. Now, apologies for the fact I'm reviewing this kit so far into its lifespan, but fact is I never owned one of these, and to this date I've only had minutes of experience trying out a few games on it. It's once again thanks to my workplace that I was finally able to get my hands on one and use it in my home for several hours to get a solid idea of what the system is capable of. See, since I first quickly tried the kit a couple of years ago, even though my time with it was limited, I was beyond impressed with what I got to see. During a gaming event at our office, I was able to quickly try games like Batman Arkham Knight VR and Skyrim VR, and the thing that shocked me the most was the way I had adjusted my expectations based on the system's specs, only to see the result greatly exceed these. I expected more SDE, an image much less sharp than what I saw, and performance problems that never quite materialized during my tryouts. As far as VR standards go, it only took me minutes to realize this system is well within those standards, if not a little bit above them. In this video, I'll try to go over everything I've discovered, starting with the hardware, then the setup, and finally I'll describe my experience going through 4 different titles, starting from less relevant experiences such as Stunt, Kite, Masters VR, and Summer Funland VR, then moving into more serious VR business with Resident Evil 7 and Borderlands 2 VR. So let's get started. Usually when you're about to buy any VR kit, the first thing you'll look at is the hardware and its specs. The PSVR kit runs off either a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 4 Pro system. And this is where, before ever trying this system, I was misled into thinking a console would be terrible for VR, especially something like the standard PS4. The vanilla PlayStation 4 doesn't pack much of a punch compared to a PC with graphics performance that is at par with the lower-end gaming PCs with only 1.84 T-flops. T-flops being a short for trillion floating point operations per second. If you need a comparison reference, an NVIDIA GTX 970 is capable of 3.9 T-flops, nearly 3 times what the standard PS4 is capable of. The system only has 8 GB of system RAM, which is actually shared between the system and the graphics, so it left me wondering how in the hell that machine could ever keep up with the standards of VR. The PlayStation 4 Pro starts entering a far more VR-friendly realm. On the memory front, you've effectively got the same thing, just 8 GB of GDDR5, but the big difference here is the graphics processing unit, which can top an impressive 4.2 T-flops, a number that for once exceeds some fairly decent gaming PCs. I was always under the impression that for PlayStation VR to work decently, one would require owning a PlayStation 4 Pro, and that the experience on the vanilla system would be terrible. But I was wrong. I'll explain later in this video why I was wrong. Dead cold wrong. Now that we glanced over the system powering this whole experience, let's take a look at the headset itself. Physically speaking, the PSVR headset is one of the heavier ones on the market, weighing in at 610 grams, which is about 20% more than a Rift or a Vive. This was actually a surprise to me as I learned of this only after using the headset, and I could swear I did not feel any strain or drag from this added weight. In fact, I thought it didn't feel any heavier than anything I've tried on the market so far. The thing with this unit is its comfort factor, which is likely what offsets that extra weight completely. The comfort factor is through the roof thanks to its poofy head strap, which was in my opinion surprisingly easy to adjust, but even more importantly, made itself easy to forget while wearing for long durations of time. The headset itself uses a pair of 960 by 1080 OLED displays. It's not a very impressive resolution on paper, and one might think that this unit has a strong SDE, but that would be quite incorrect. The pixel density in this unit is one of the most impressive aspects I've seen based on that spec, and it may be thanks to Sony's top-notch optics. I love these lenses. The only fancy thing they did to these lenses is have some anti-glare on them. There's no ridges in the plastic, and thus they produce absolutely no blurring or unwanted God rays like the Oculus Rift does, for example. In addition to clarity, these lenses somehow almost completely eliminate the screen door effect, yielding an image that could cheat your mind into thinking the displays are actually 1440p rather than just 1080p. Honestly though, I did expect this unit to come with good optics, as when it comes to headsets, Sony have had experience with making stereoscopic video headsets in the past, and so this is definitely not their first rodeo. They knew what they were doing. There are two refresh rates on this unit, 90Hz and 120Hz. Now I'm going to crudely assume here that only a few games will use 120Hz on the PlayStation 4 standard, with most games having to resort to 90Hz for performance reasons, but probably it's going to run almost everything at 120 on the Pro. Needless to say, during my gameplay sessions, never once did I notice a single frame drop. Either they're using some kind of time warp I just couldn't visually notice, or all the PlayStation VR games are designed to run at exactly the required frame rate to match the display's refresh rate. Either way, when it comes to smoothness, this actually exceeded both my expectations and the current day VR standard. Now, I do have a few complaints about the design. Nothing as major as, for example, the fabric Oculus used between the lenses inside the headset, but still choices I find questionable. First, the padding on the head strap, both the back and the front pads, are not removable. This means they're actually very hard to clean, as you have to wash them while they're still on the headset. I've been a big proponent of modular padding for VR headsets over the years, since I've found out that when you use VR for long enough, hygiene becomes an actual problem and you wind up requiring to wash any of the padding on the head strap or the faceport. It's actually cumbersome to clean the PSVR unit, and I really think these pads should have been Velcro detachable. This design will force you to have to clean the pads frequently if you want them to stay fresh and clean and free of what I could call Beat Saber funk. The next complaint I have is the rubber faceport. Actually, okay, most of it is not bad. It's definitely easier to clean than that goddamn fabric Oculus use in their units. But the part I find weird is the nose port. It's not the worst concept I've ever seen, it's just strange. Instead of going for an opening like the Vive, which just covers over your nose, this one has two rubber flaps that expand when your nose goes into the slit between them. It's not entirely uncomfortable, it just took me a bit of time to get used to. It can squeeze your nose in a strange way, and you need to push them around a bit until they're seated comfortably over your nose. The last note on this faceport is it's subject to more light leaking than I'm used to. This hasn't broken my immersion at all during tests, but I did find it could have done a slightly better job at blocking out the outside light. It's a very minor downside, but it's one that you're also bound to notice a little bit. Now back to something positive. This is actually a huge surprise to me and I'm very impressed. At a first glance, I thought this headset's physical adjustments would be cumbersome and limited, but wow, no. Was I ever so wrong? The fact that the tightening adjustment on the back sounded like a snowboard clip adjuster might have misguided me into this assumption. In reality, the process is simple. You press the rear button and pull the strap until you can pop this baby over your head. Once you do that, just let go of the back strap so the headset gently but firmly grabs onto your head. Next, if you need more tightness, just simply turn the adjustment wheel in the back until it's nice and snug. Finally, you press the button under the headset itself, which will allow you to slide the front closer or further from your face. Once you're done, you're ready to go, and trust me, while researching for this video, I've gone through nearly 3-hour-long sessions with this headset on, and I generally have no complaints about comfort or fitting. This was one of the best fits I've ever felt in VR to date. Now, there's quite a few other components in this kit, notably the PlayStation camera, which you'll need for this system to work, the PlayStation Move controllers, which are entirely optional, and a whole bundle of dongles and wires. This may be the strangest linkage I've ever seen for any VR kit, And while this pile of wires may seem scary, don't worry, I'll go over all those components right now as it's time to get to the setup section of this video. Alright, let's get to the PlayStation VR setup. Now this is probably one of the worst aspects of the system I've seen so far. And I say that in reference to other headsets I have experience with. This is a lot more connections than I'm used to. So I'm going to try to go from the headset to the link box, then to the console and into the television. Nice flow, but I do have to cover one requirement first. The PlayStation camera. Now you may or may not already own this when you get PlayStation VR. There are 3 variants of the PlayStation VR kit. The one that includes only the headset, the one that includes the headset and the PlayStation camera, and the one that includes the headset, the PlayStation camera, and the PlayStation Move controllers, which, by the way, I'll get to in a moment. So, the PlayStation camera is required, so if you got the kit that comes only with the headset, you're expected to already own this. You basically go ahead and plug this baby to the back of your PlayStation 4, and then you use this clampy thingy to balance this on top of your television or place it on a flat surface. Now, one big complaint I do have is that this has no 1/4-inch screw jack, so I was unable to use a tripod. I had to myself balance this on top of my TV, and I found it quite difficult to get the angle I needed for proper tracking, although in the end it did work out. Optionally, you have the PlayStation Move controllers. Now, these are not required, and some of the kits, complete kits, won't even include them, although they will greatly improve your VR experience because, well, they are motion controllers as much as you know them. So, they kind of look like something else than motion controllers, I gotta say. They kind of make me giggle when they light up because it takes things over the top. I don't want to say anything here because I don't know who's going to be watching this video, but those of you who know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. These things look like more than motion controllers, but yeah, no, I gotta say they work very well. This is where we get in business. We grab our headset and the wire, and we get ready to plug this in our PlayStation VR link box. Just got to mention, along this wire, you have a little dongle. It's got volume controls, a mute control, a power control, and a headphone jack, so you can plug in your own headphones. So at the end of this wire, you got 2 connections, an HDMI and a DisplayPort looking thingy. So you could go ahead and plug these directly in your PlayStation VR link box, or optionally, but this is probably for the best even though it's optional, you may want to use the extender so you have a bit more wire with this thing. Because you might have noticed already that this headset's wire is really short. So you'll want to maybe be using the extender. So what you do is you grab the extender and kind of like if you were plugging it into the link box, you plug the HDMI and this DisplayPort looking thingy into it. And there you go, you're done. Now, I have a complaint about this, is that the PlayStation VR headset's wire is so short. And look, I'm not a tall guy, but when I'm standing with this headset using the extender, this dongle is floating above the ground next to my feet. It's not even reaching the ground. So it gives you an idea of how short the headset's wire is. Not the best, but again, something that did work out. I was able to use it for a long period of time. Let's go all the way to the end of this wire. You can see how much longer it is than the headset's wire. So just like if you were at the end of the headset's wire, you got the 2 same connections, we grab the PlayStation link box. Now the link box is, to me, a unique beast. So it's got this short side and this wide side. So it's got a sort of pivot mechanism. I'm showing you the front right now because that's where we're gonna plug this in. You pull back on this mechanism so that you can expose the 2 connections here, and you go ahead and plug the HDMI and that weird DisplayPort looking cable. So there you go, you are plugged into the link box. We're not done. Next thing, is you're gonna want power. So let's get the power dongle for the PlayStation VR. One end goes in the wall and the other end goes in the back of the link box right here. Next thing we want is the USB. We have a USB cable that goes from here, back of the link box, all the way to your console. And I have this wire bundled up so I can nicely transport it, but this, you'd unbundle it and obviously plug it into your PlayStation. We have the HDMI that goes to the PlayStation that we are going to plug in right here. Now you want to be careful not to make this thing slide back as you're doing that, which happened to me a lot of times. I would actually end up snagging wires and sliding this thing around. I did get the hang of it after a while. And finally, you want to plug the HDMI that goes into your television. So now we got the link box connected, and you can imagine now you have a USB, the PlayStation camera, and one HDMI going to the PlayStation from this link box. Now the cool thing is this is a pass-through. You don't have to unplug this to use your PlayStation 4 normally. You'll still see the output just as it is on your television. And then when you turn on the headset, you'll be able to do some VR. So the problem here is that I remember when I introduced the HTC Vive, I sort of presented the link box it has as a big downside. If the HTC Vive link box is a big downside, this is an enormous downside. It's larger, it's got 6 connections into it. Okay, yeah, technically this is just one, but it's still 2 connections to make, and I find that really weird. So possibly at least the most unusual connection I've ever had to make, if not the worst. The good thing is that this is where it stops. From here on, PlayStation VR mostly impressed me. So if you're ready to deal with this, well, keep watching because it gets cool from here on. Now, before I go on to the gameplay section of this video, there's something really important I have to bring up. See, when I borrowed the kit from work, including the console itself, I asked if this was the PlayStation 4 Standard or a PlayStation 4 Pro. I forget who gave me the answer, but they said it was a PlayStation 4 Pro. So please excuse my ignorance of the PlayStation 4 line of products because I'm not particularly into consoles. I don't own any of these, nor do I know the difference in appearance between a PlayStation 4 Standard or a PlayStation 4 Pro. I took this person's answer for granted and went on to doing my gameplay testing for several hours, going through 4 different titles and raking in over 6 hours of gameplay. This whole entire time, I thought I was running on a PlayStation 4 Pro. It's only after all the gameplay testing that I started wondering, could I be wrong about this being a Pro Edition? So I quickly looked up online, only to find out that, shocker, this isn't a Pro Edition at all. This whole entire time, everything I've been playing was being run off a vanilla PlayStation 4. See, the PlayStation 4 Pro is actually a bit larger than the original system and has a few distinct visual differences that I saw in images that confirmed to me that this thing here is just a standard PlayStation 4. This didn't only explain a lot of the shortcomings I observed during my playthroughs, but it also got me really impressed. Had this been a Pro, I would have already been moderately satisfied with this kit's capabilities, but damn, at this point, based on everything I've seen so far, I can only wonder how in the hell can a basic PlayStation 4 run everything I've played so far with such a respectable standard. All that gameplay I went through for hours thinking this was a PlayStation 4 Pro is now orders of magnitude more impressive knowing that this is just a mere vanilla system. I can now only imagine how it would have been on a PS4 Pro. I reckon the content would have easily competed with mid-range VR-ready PCs. Yes, it's probably best that you use a PS4 Pro for PlayStation VR, but honestly, I'm now going to call the standard edition of this console the little machine that could. Because goddamn, I'm now officially blown the fuck away with what it was capable of delivering to me. We'll keep all this in mind as I now go through everything I've tried with the time I had. Over the course of 6 hours, I played 4 different titles. First, I went for the simple entry-level stuff so I could get a general idea of the system's VR capabilities. I launched Stunt Kite Masters VR so I could get an idea of how gameplay goes with the PS Move controllers and how good that tracking is. And then I fired up Summer Funland VR to take a look at a variety of basic VR experiences that would further show me how the capabilities of this kit work together. Do keep in mind that when I initially tried these 2 games, I wasn't yet set up to record any gameplay, so I actually replayed these at the very end of my testing session so I could have footage of them. Now, these 2 apps are what I'd call demo-grade content, so I needed a couple of bigger games to try. For the bulkier part of my gameplay, where I finally got to see how this all comes together in the context of full-blown VR mechanics, I first played Resident Evil 7 for a little over 3 hours, and finally engaged in some Borderlands 2 VR, which not only gave me a broader view of the PlayStation VR, but also an introduction to shooter gameplay using the PlayStation Move controllers. I do have to point out how I captured this gameplay, because it did prove to be a downside of the system. Now, it's not a major downside since most players won't look to be producing content with their gameplay, but it's still something I want to point out. Since the PlayStation console outputs the gameplay not only in the headset, but also projects a 2D version of the image on the monitor or television, I simply hooked up the HDMI output to an Elgato Game Capture HD and set it to record at 1080p 30, which is that device's maximum resolution. And this is where I noticed a pretty important shortcoming. The resolution of the 2D image the PlayStation outputs to the TV is quite stretched. It looks like something at or below 720p, and there didn't seem to be anything I could do to improve this, not even having my Elgato capturing at its highest possible resolution. In addition to the low image quality, the output doesn't quite fill the screen. As you can see, there are black bars on the left and right of the projected 2D image. Since I wanted this video to look a little better than just shoving this output directly on the screen, I took the liberty of using a few tricks that would help fill the void, so to say. I moved the gameplay output to the right edge of the screen and added a neat, narrow crossfade on the left edge, then added a blurred background of the gameplay below it. This left room for me to put my face cam on the top left, and as a little extra, I further filled in that blankness on the left by adding the game's logo, an animation of the headset, and my channel's logo. This isn't too terrible, and I hope it doesn't take away from the immense positives I saw with this kit, but it was the very best way I found to convey this gameplay footage to you. I've got a lot of it to go through, so let's get started. It's time to jump into Stunt Kite Masters VR. So before you get into any game with the PSVR, all you have to do is, with the whole kit connected as we saw in the setup section of this video, you just hit the headset's power button on the little dongle and boom, voila, you'll see your PlayStation 4 menu on a virtual screen similar to the way you'd see it on your TV. At this point, you just have to pick what you want to play from your menu. Usually the system will give you a VR health and safety warning upon launching any game. Then it's going to have you check that your play space is clear by giving you a view of the PlayStation camera, and once you confirm that, you're ready to go in-game. Why did I even launch this, you wonder? Why didn't I just hop into Resident Evil 7 right away and leave the small demo-grade games on the side? Well, keep in mind, between 2016 and today, I only had the chance to try the system for a little under half an hour total. And each time I tried it, I did not get to use the motion controllers, so I wanted something basic and simple, so I could just get some experience with the PS Move wands. This title seemed like a perfect fit for the task. It's as basic as it gets. You fly a 2-string kite. That's pretty much it. Yes, there's different game modes, some where you have to hit targets, some where you have to dodge obstacles, but in the end, it's almost always the same. You're flying a 2-string kite. This might be simple as hell, but as expected, what Stunt Kite Masters did here is allow me to gauge how legit the PS Move tracking is, and I've got to say, aside from a few moments where I lost tracking while getting the hang of how to place myself in front of the PlayStation camera, once I got things going, the gameplay gave me enough that I started being impressed with how accurate these controllers are. Not that I expected absolute garbage, no, but I definitely didn't expect these to feel as good as any VR controller I've tried to date, which ended up being the case. The accuracy is there and the latency is virtually not noticeable. As far as motion control tracking goes, this respects the standard very well. The only downside I found, and this is something I actually had to get used to, is that the PlayStation camera's field of view is really lower than I'd have expected it to be. If you're not standing far enough from the camera, I found my ideal distance to be about 8 feet. You will get tracking cutoffs when you move your hands too far away from your body. The range of this camera is nowhere near what you'd expect from the Oculus Rift or even more so the HTC Vive. You won't be able to walk around much with this kit, and the reliance on artificial player rotation and movement will be very high because of this. Furthermore, since I didn't get to try a very broad selection of games, I'm hoping that all of the PSVR titles never expect you to place your hand near the ground. There is no way in hell this camera's field of view will ever allow you to be tracked standing up while also being able to track your floor level, and thus, any game that expects you to, for example, pick up an object that's on the floor would cause you to lose tracking very easily. Now, this is entirely personal preference, but I've always found that room-scale VR titles that attempt immersion by constantly making you reach for in-game objects aren't only gimmicky, but sometimes even downright obnoxious. I love my room-scale VR, but I think physical interactions in a game should be kept within reasonable bounds, and there should always be an alternative to physical interactions like a point-and-click system to, for example, pick up objects for a distance. Because of this, I've been highly forgiving of this kit's limited range. If you're playing a game with a reasonable room-scale mechanic, you'll never experience any of the potential issues I described. Yes, large range room scale VR can be really cool, but it should never ever be a requirement. Not only does tracking have its limitations, but we're not all owners of empty gymnasiums we can set up for the sole purpose of VR. There's a limit to what's reasonable. With that being said, I found Stunt Kite Masters to be a great introduction to room scale VR on this kit, mostly thanks to its basic and simple nature. Now, I do have to say, I saw this title was already in our library. I'm not the one who bought it, so I can't tell if this came with the kit or if someone actually purchased it separately, but even though this game did give me a great idea of how well the PS Move controllers can work, I noticed its price was $10 on the PlayStation Store, and honestly, I have to admit that's too much money. Not only is this game available for a mere $2 on Steam, but it's also something I would call demo grade. This is the type of thing I would imagine should come with the headset so you can try out something fun immediately, rather than a title you should pay money for. Yes, Stunt Kite Masters VR works very well and gives a great introduction to what your kit can do, but no, I would not spend any actual currency on this game, and I honestly recommend you don't either. Your PlayStation VR demo disc will give you plenty to do in comparison, and you won't have to dish out a dime for it since that one comes with most kits. Speaking of games that I find are demo-grade material, it's time to get on with the next thing I launched, Summer Funland VR. Now that I got to try the PlayStation Move controllers for the first time, I found another title we already had in our library. One that could bring it all together in a collection of minigames adapted for VR. Enter Summer Funland VR, a theme park with various rides and games that can fully demonstrate the VR kit's potential. This thing is entirely designed for VR newbies, and it's a perfect entry-level fit for any player. You begin in a theme park, one big enough to start showing you the PlayStation VR's graphical fidelity. Now, it's not as extensive as the top-notch games you'll get to see in this console's library, but it is a good step up from what we saw in Stunt Kite Masters. You'll notice that the movement control is teleport only, which is something I'd complain about with most full-fledged games, but again, this clearly being catered for VR beginners will obviously cut them some slack, not to mention most of the movement is there for you to be able to travel between rides, or even simpler, like I did, just walk up to the map and fast travel to the ride or the game you want to go to. I started by jumping into the Whack-A-Mole, Whack-A-Penguin game. Very simple, you grab the two hammers, slam that start button, and you're playing this game's rendition of Whack-A-Mole. Again, this is a good way to get a feel for how accurate the PS Move controllers are. It's fairly simple and short, but it works as well as I would have expected a VR kit can deliver. Next thing I did was a bit more elaborate. If you were paying attention during the development days of VR, you might have seen a little game called Proton Pulse, which was a really cool looking block breaker game. The big difference here is back when I tried Proton Pulse, motion controls didn't exist yet, so the deflection mechanic worked by moving your head around to place the panel to deflect the ball back at the blocks. This time around, Summer Funland's block breaker game fully uses the PlayStation Move controllers, so each of your hands is a paddle that you can use to deflect the ball. It was a really cool thing to try, but here's where the PlayStation camera's field of view becomes a bit of a problem. I had to set the paddle down low to block the ball a few times, and sometimes lose tracking for a brief moment, which would result in the ball just passing through. Like I said earlier, I knew the system wouldn't fare too well with ground level tracking, and this sort of proved me right. Even with the size of these paddles, sometimes the controller would slip out of range and I'd miss the ball when I really shouldn't have. However, as far as block breaker games goes, this was really fun to try, and I do liken it a lot to Proton Pulse. Now, since I hadn't seen how shooters go with this kit, next I had to try Summer Funland's shooting range minigame. This basically goes the way you'd expect it. Pick up a pair of guns and the game starts. A bunch of cardboard figures pop up here and there and you have to shoot them. This is not much, and if you're familiar enough with VR, you wouldn't play this for too long, but the experience was extensive enough for me to be able to tell that when time comes to try a room scale shooter in this thing, I may just be completely satisfied. No tracking issues, accuracy very much at par with existing VR systems, and visuals good enough to go along with it. I got exactly what I wanted from this carnival shooter. It showed me this kit is more than adequate for VR shooting. I need to give a bit of backstory for the next thing I tried. See, part of my short time with this kit was spent setting up a VR demo at an elementary school. My employer put together a group of volunteers to go to a school and present a set of VR demos for the entire school to try out. This is actually when I first saw Summer Funland VR, and I ended up discovering its roller coaster ride. I actually selected this experience for the PSVR demo since it not only had decent visuals, giving a good introduction to virtual reality, but it was also what I'd call kid-friendly, while actually giving enough of a rush to demonstrate the feeling VR can give you without actually scaring the crap out of any of the young ones. It ended up being a really good choice because it proved to be a blast for everyone who tried it. The way they made this ride, they stayed conservative enough on the movement speed that it won't actually induce motion sickness to even the most sensitive of beginners. Seemed that it had just enough to give that feeling of speed without taking things too far. I launched this roller coaster ride again during my session just so I could get a final idea of my thoughts on it, and honestly for me it doesn't do much. If you actually triple the speed of the entire thing, then yeah, maybe I'd start getting those satisfying rushes, but like it is now, this is too tame for me. Visually speaking, although it's simplistic, it does give you a view of the whole park, and I thought that was actually cool. This isn't no Resident Evil 7 or Borderlands 2 view, but it was still enough to make me realize, hey, this is a mere console rendering all of this at a really smooth rate. Remember, at this point, I still thought this console was a PS4 Pro, and the fact that it wasn't even that in retrospect makes the whole thing even more impressive. The next thing I ran is a sort of combination between an air balloon ride and a minigame, one where you must throw balls through floating hoops along your way. This is actually another great experience to demonstrate the ability of the PS Move controllers. I do have to point out that I enjoyed the way they did their throwing mechanic here. You don't have to air whack your controllers like if you were throwing objects for real, something I found to be a big problem in PC VR games in the past while using the Oculus or the Vive kits, because you risk actually throwing your controller in the process or smashing said controller against a hard surface. Instead here, you just have to gently swing your hand in the direction you're throwing and release the trigger and boom, the object takes off with about 10 times the force you're actually applying to it. This did make accuracy quite difficult to gauge, hence why I sucked at getting the balls through the hoops, but in the end it proved a much better way to throw things since it keeps you within your tracking range and doesn't require you making any extreme physical gestures that could result in any accidents. Again, this is another ride that, despite the simplicity of this app, pushes the visuals far enough that you really start getting an idea that this console's VR kit can do a lot despite its limitations. The sense of altitude is most definitely present, and since you have a view of the whole park while going through this, you do get some interesting visual detail. Last thing I tried in Summer Funland is the ocean ride. This was actually another candidate I had for the VR demo we gave at an elementary school, but I opted for the roller coaster ride instead. No, I didn't think the roller coaster ride was better. In fact, I think that despite the fact the ocean ride has no gameplay interaction of any kind, it was probably the single best experience in Summer Funland overall. The problem here is that this ride has sections that I knew kids might find a bit creepy, maybe actually scary by parts. I did not want to have a bunch of first graders tell their parents that the VR demo they got at school gave them nightmares, so I opted out of this one. However, if you're going to give a grown adult an introduction to VR, this is probably one of the best ways to go. Trying this doesn't require explaining any control schemes or gameplay mechanics, you just sit and enjoy the ride, and it's probably one of the most visually rich rides in this game. The 3D models in here are still somewhat simplistic, but turns out the textures take it up a notch compared to everything else, and it truly delivers something I deem excellent for demonstrating how virtual reality can make you downright believe you're somewhere else than you actually are. I mentioned some of the sections could be judged creepy by some. Well, those are some of the most impressive moments I've personally seen in Summer Funland. The animations are cool, and there are a few moments where the impression of physical scale VR can bring you, that natural depth perception is really put to great use. When it comes to Summer Funland VR, unlike Stunt Kite Masters, I'm a bit on the fence as to saying I would not recommend it. See, personally, I've seen a lot of similar experiences in VR, and I got to try them for free. Summer Funland goes for $20 on the PlayStation Store, and I doubt I'd dish out that much for it, given there's a lot of other games that would cost me less and bring me more playtime. However, on the upside, these guys packed about 24 completely different experiences into one package. Does that justify the cost? Well, let's say you're new to VR and you need to try a broad range of experiences without things getting too extreme or intense. Or let's say you want to introduce family and friends to VR without things getting too complicated. In those cases, I'd say it's not such a bad idea to add Summer Funland to your library. Again, in this case, I'm not the one who bought this game. It was just sitting in our library, so I don't know if it came with a kit or if someone else actually bought it. If there's any kits that include this game, that's actually awesome because newcomers will have use for this. If your only option is to buy it, consider if you need an extensive intro to VR for yourself, or if you want to bring in others to try it for themselves. It's good for beginners, and it's also great for kids. It might be worth it, especially if you catch it during a PlayStation Store sale, where the title might be as much as 50% off. While Summer Funland VR helped me put everything together through a variety of experiences, the next thing I launched is not only a behemoth in comparison, but it's also the single most anticipated thing on my VR to-do list, Resident Evil 7. For those of you who follow this channel already, you're probably aware that I am very fond of Resident Evil 7. I've played hours of it in virtual reality on the PC using Vorpex, and I've pushed the thing pretty far into giving out the best clarity and the smoothest gameplay. A little over a year ago, I was hoping Capcom would finally wake up and port their first-party VR edition of the game onto the PC systems, but to this very date there's still no news on this ever happening. As time went on, I became more and more curious about seeing this game on its exclusive VR system, the PlayStation 4. The very first thing I noticed when I started this game is how it has the exact same problem it did on the PC through Vorpex. Oh, the aliasing is real. See, this game doesn't really have true means of anti-aliasing other than its resolution scale option. It does use a few anti-aliasing filters, but I've mostly found those to be more detrimental to the visuals than anything else. The situation on the PlayStation 4 is absolutely no different. In fact, I found the visuals I got to be a little bit inferior to the clarity you'll get if you run this game through Vorpex with all the default settings. If you compare the PlayStation edition to the way I run the game through Vorpex with my enhanced settings, including higher resolutions and an increased field of view, it's significantly blurrier in the PlayStation 4. Now, again, you have to remember, I still thought I was actually running a PlayStation 4 Pro, and this is where I'm actually baffled. Yeah, the clarity may be inferior to what I saw with Vorpex, but how in the hell did they even manage to get this game running so damn smoothly on a console with so little horsepower? Visual clarity is one thing, but frame rate is definitely another to consider, and throughout my entire session, just like the 2 other previous games, I never saw the system perceivably drop a single frame. If I compare this to any of the Vorpex setups I've tried, it's night and day. Damn, does this run smooth as hell. I can only imagine that on the PlayStation 4 Pro, you'll get the same impeccable game performance, but also I can probably assume the visuals are about twice as sharp as what the vanilla system can deliver. I really wish I had a Pro to try this with, because I can't help but think the clarity might actually be superior to even my very best Vorpex setup on the PC with the GTX 1080. See, they did something smart here, and it comes into effect especially on the standard PlayStation 4. This game has a resolution scale option on the PC that you can adjust yourself. It'll render the image at a higher resolution than your screen, which reduces aliasing a great deal. In the case of the PlayStation VR, this option varies automatically based on how rich the scenery you're looking at is. So if you say enter an area with too much detail for the system to keep up its frame rate, the resolution scale will temporarily drop to help keep up the smooth output. Sure, this can make the image much blurrier at times, but again, considering this is a standard PlayStation 4, at no point did this variable resolution completely take me out of it. In fact, I'd say it's probably one of the smarter moves I've seen developers do in this game, allowing the thing to keep running smoother than I've ever seen this game go before. I can't say for sure how this would go with the Pro, but it's obvious that the graphics would be at least twice as sharp, something that would place the bar equal or greater to the clarity I've managed to get out of Vorpex with my enhanced settings. Pair that with a near perfect frame rate and the fact that this first-party edition of the game has, unlike Vorpex, absolutely not a single visual glitch and is capable of utilizing every single graphics effect this game offers, and I have to admit, down the line, this version is in many ways superior to what I got to see on the PC. Now, the fact that the aliasing was prominent in this game wasn't really the biggest disappointment. See, a lot of PlayStation VR games offer a duo of control modes. Either you can play standing or seated with the gamepad, or you can use the PlayStation Move controllers for a room scale experience. Well, this was not the case with Resident Evil 7. Sure, I'm a big fan of seated VR, and for the majority of what I do with it, I still use the mouse and keyboard while sitting my ass on a chair, but honestly, I was hoping to see RE7 come with the option of room scale. Instead, you'll be playing RE7 with a gamepad for controls and movement, and the aim is done by moving your head towards what you want to shoot or hit. This is something the community has now dubbed as face gun. This is where I started realizing those of you playing this game on the PC using Vorpex, including me, are really not missing out that much. Sure, on the Pro you'll probably get better performance and similar visual quality, but aside from that, the two versions are almost the same. In fact, there's a few things in the PlayStation VR edition that I didn't like compared to the Vorpex PC edition. Take, for example, the fade they do between cutscenes. Yeah, I know, forced camera motion is a big no-no in VR, and they did this fade mechanic to avoid any of that, but damn, they did not do that good a job at it. In the scene where Mia stabs the player, I think there were about a dozen fade to blacks. Twice, maybe 3 times the amount they needed. But in addition to that, those flashes would somehow slightly change my view center, and so I found myself having to turn my head after each fade to keep looking at the action. I'd say this is a 50-50 split. Half of the fades were well used and served their purpose, but the other half were just superfluous and actually took me out of it a little bit. Yeah, with the Vorpex version, you'll get a tiny bit of forced camera motion, but I found that not having fade out kept those cutscenes as immersive as they could be, and that the forced camera motion itself was never really enough to induce any discomfort. I don't know, maybe it's my strong VR legs, but I honestly found the fading to black quite excessive. Here's something cool that I actually did not expect. There are quite a few VR control options you can adjust in the menu. Things like fading out at the edges of your field of view during intense movement, reducing your movement speed for comfort, switching between snap rotation and smooth rotation are all options you can in fact adjust. Since I've got the VR legs for it, I went with smooth rotation and the fastest movement available. There is one option I somehow missed though, which in retrospect I wish I hadn't, and that's the field of view fading, which you'll see a lot of in this video. Now, I just said this, I do my seated VR gameplay using the mouse and keyboard on the PC. It's my single favorite control input method, and that will likely never change. Not to mention, I tend to really hate the gamepad, especially when it comes to a first-person game. Sure, this game uses the good old face gun aiming method, and you'd think eliminating the terrible aim precision that comes with the gamepad to be enough, but no, even without having to deal with the gamepad's god-awful aiming precision, and despite the neat VR control options they offer, I still had a lot of problems, notably rotating and moving. See, thumbstick rotation, it just really sucks. There's no other way to put it. Not only is it awfully linear, with almost no nuance to the speed, but it's always either too fast or too slow, not to mention it can easily induce motion sickness. If you've ever had the chance to try seated first-person VR with a mouse, yes, it will also take some time to get used to, but the adaptation curve is a lot smoother, and in the end, the mouse will always be orders of magnitude more comfortable thanks to its nuance. You can rotate really fast, really slow, or gradually change your speed as you go about it. Thumbsticks are basically a bare-bone, crude alternative in comparison. The other issue I had, also with the goddamn thumbsticks, is the fact that they use the stick button to either sprint or crouch. Left stick press is to run, and right stick press is to crouch. I absolutely hate this control scheme, and I cannot tell you the number of times I ended up accidentally crouching in the heat of the moment while trying to evade a dangerous situation, thus completely compromising myself and taking a hit, one that I otherwise wouldn't have taken had I remained standing and able to run. This might be a personal preference issue, but it really kept happening over and over and over. Yeah, I actually did a lot better in this playthrough than I did when I first played this on a PC using mouse and keyboard, but that is solely because I already knew the objectives in these sections of gameplay. It is definitely not thanks to this bloody awful gamepad bullshit. Yes, I know that you can hook up a keyboard and even a mouse to the PlayStation, but sadly I didn't get the time to play around with that, nor do I even know if hooking those up would even work with Resident Evil 7. If anyone knows if this is possible, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to confirm if it's possible to play Resident Evil 7 in VR with a mouse and keyboard on the PlayStation. If someone confirms this for me, I swear I'm borrowing that kit for another week just to try that. It would be really awesome. Now let's get to the bottom line here, because in the end, Resident Evil 7's elements do come together to form what I found to be an extremely enjoyable experience. Yeah, I take issue with the aliasing, which you'll probably get a lot less of on the PS4 Pro. Yeah, I take issue with the fixed comfort mechanics like that fading out during cutscenes. Yeah, I take massive issue with the control input method I'm limited to, but none of these issues stop me from enjoying this game. I played it in 2 sessions, one lasting over 2 hours and a second one lasting just a little over an hour. Given the little time I had to try this system out, that speaks enormous volumes. I was generally having a great time playing a game I already know and love, this time without any visual glitches and with a frame rate that made me wonder if the console consumes performance-enhancing substances before running VR. Seriously, does it just pop a few speed pills before firing up? What the hell? When I found out this was just a vanilla PlayStation a day after playing, I simply couldn't believe it. Initially, I was going to end my playtesting session here. Resident Evil 7 was the thing I most wanted to try on the platform. But having seen so many capabilities so far, there's another game that came to mind. One that would throw me into another important test. How does this system handle high-action shooters in VR? I figured I'd want to answer that question, so I got my hands on Borderlands 2 VR, which I'm going to cover next. So, Borderlands 2 VR is another game that I was disappointed to find out would be a PlayStation VR exclusive. I've had the chance to play this game in virtual reality on the PC, also using Vorpix, and based on what I've seen with that, I know for a fact this title is an excellent fit for any kind of VR. Seated, room scale, doesn't matter, it's just obvious it's a great fit for it. This time around, we're not limited to face gun. I charged up my PS Move controllers, preparing for a long, full-blown room-scale VR session, and started up Borderlands 2 VR. At first I got a bit worried. You won't really be able to tell from the video, but I had a really strange motion control lag at the title menu. There was an extremely small delay between my actual movements and those I saw in the game. It was incredibly small, but given this is VR, I could immediately notice it. However, here's the weird thing, the second the game itself started up, I checked to see if this lag was still there, and sure enough, it was gone. At this point, I had tracking just as good as any VR kit without any delay whatsoever. Again, just like Resident Evil 7, I found a multitude of VR control options in the menus. This time around, there's a lot of them that surprised me. Not only is this game perfectly adapted for VR beginners with options like teleporting, snap rotation, and field of view fading, but it's also got all the options an advanced VR gamer like me would want, from smooth movement and rotation to movement speed and even the ability to enable jumping. As you'd expect, I kept my options away from the teleportation and snap turning, going instead for full-out smooth movement and rotation. Now, the first key question I had, this being my first time using the PS Move controllers for a high-action first-person shooter, was how does one use smooth movement when the controllers you're using don't come with thumbsticks or D-pads? Well, I was actually surprised by the answer. All I have to do is simply hold down the center button on the left Move controller and point in the direction I want to go. To rotate, the X and O buttons on the right controller will turn me left and right respectively. Had someone explained this control scheme to me without me having a chance to actually try it, I would have thought it could be terrible, but honestly, it took me a few minutes to get used to it, and I found myself using these just as fluently as I would thumbstick movement. This made my first few moments in this game quite pleasant. Not to mention, with the height of the jumps in Borderlands 2, I ended up giving myself quite a few adrenaline rushes, even before the combat itself began. I praise the developers who worked on the control scheme for having such a broad set of options, with everything a VR junkie like me needs to control the game the way I want to. Now, having seen quite a lot of aliasing and blurriness in Resident Evil 7, the next question, which was also very quickly answered, was, how clear will these graphics look? Well, in the case of Borderlands 2 VR, all the issues I spotted in RE7 were completely absent. This being an older game readapted for VR, it's to be expected it'll demand a lot less from the system you're using, but honestly, I did not expect this level of clarity after having played Resident Evil 7. This is exactly as sharp, clear, and detailed as what I saw when I played the game on the PC with Vorpix. The visuals are simply exemplary for VR. Again, during this session, I had no idea I was using a standard PlayStation 4. I still hadn't confirmed I wasn't playing on the Pro, so in retrospect, I am honestly at a complete loss to explain how well this game performed for the near 3-hour-long session. Perfect frame rate, clear visuals, absolutely no variation in the game's resolution unlike RE7. You could have hidden the PlayStation 4 out of view and told me there was a mid-range VR-ready PC running this game, and I think I would have fallen for it. Yes, if you own a standard PlayStation 4 and have been hesitating on getting a PSVR kit because you think it requires a pro to get a good experience, think again. It's actually a very good VR kit to get even with a vanilla console thanks to games like this. To put this in perspective, I'm not even sure what more the PlayStation 4 Pro could bring to Borderlands 2 because the quality looked that damn good on the standard console. So, with the control scheme and the questions about visuals now behind me, I braved into this batshit crazy game, and I must say, for some reason, the room scale aspect just turned this into an absolute delight. See, I've played both Borderlands 1 and 2 in VR using Vorpex, and when I first played the sequel, I was one to find that I preferred the first installment for some reason. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I recall disliking the first few combat areas in Borderlands 2. This is no fault on Vorpex, rather I found the storytelling to be kind of obnoxious and the enemy patterns to be a bit over the top compared to the first game. However, this time around with room scale, it really turned things around. This is very much the most fun I've ever had playing Borderlands 2 by far. I was having such a blast with the combat, a complete contrast to the times I played it seated with Vorpex on the PC, that I was even able to forgive the obnoxious aspects like Claptrap and the long-winded characters, even to the point of actually enjoying them a bit. Yes, I'm ready to say this. I think this is one of the best room-scale VR shooters I have ever played to date, all platforms combined. I knew it would be a good fit for the media, but damn, this went way above my expectations. I found myself wanting to get to the next combat area as quickly as possible, looking for a place where I can jump off a ridiculously high cliff to get that realistic rush of a free fall. The game will make you feel like a freaking god. This is going to be a weird comparison, but one of my favorite VR games to date, one that ironically doesn't support VR out of the box, is Shadow Warrior 2013 with Vorpex. And it's one of the few other games that have given me an adrenaline rush as intense as Borderlands 2 VR. You'd think from seeing the video that this is dizzying or disorientating, but hell no! The intense movement just makes you feel like you are the embodiment of a fucking jet fighter with anti-gravity thrusters. This is really a feeling I hope everyone gets to try in VR one day or another because words cannot fully describe it. God damn, the action in Borderlands 2 VR was just awesome. The other thing that really surprised me about the game is how they handled their menu interfaces. I was worried it could be something contrived, given how that game's menus are quite extensive, and approaching the controls for it wrong in VR could result in something, well, contrived and cumbersome. Well, no. Everything was super easy to use, and it would take me a simple matter of seconds to change guns, browse through my inventory, apply a skill, or anything else of the sort. The VR dev team for this game didn't just nail the controls, they pretty much nailed everything. There's a really good indicator to tell if I'm liking a game or not. When I find myself unable to put the fucking thing down, you know I'm having an excellent time. I initially planned to play only a little over 1 hour of this because I didn't want to have to sift through too much footage for my video. But as I played, time started just zooming by to the point where I built up 2 hours and 40 minutes of gameplay, over twice what I really wanted to record. This speaks volumes on the quality of Borderlands 2 VR because honestly, just the fact that I even omitted to lift up the headset for 2 seconds just to check how long I had been playing indicates that I was playing this thing like an absolute junkie, completely captivated by his poison. I'm glad I didn't stop my session at Resident Evil 7 because Borderlands 2 VR showed me a lot more of what this kit is capable of and fully confirmed to me that this system is worth getting. Now that I know the console was just a standard PlayStation 4, it's obviously a no-brainer. If you want to do good VR, the console model you have will most definitely not stop you from enjoying the VR kit. Honestly, another thing, I hope this VR edition of Borderlands drops on the PC sometime in the future because once again, the awful concept of exclusivity is depriving a large section of the VR consumer base from playing something that's actually one of the best VR games in existence. See, I knew it. Since I managed to get a glimpse of what this thing could do for very brief moments over the last few years, PlayStation VR became an enigma to me. From what I had seen, it was performing a lot better than I expected, and delivering graphical fidelity I just didn't even think was possible through a console. I am glad I got to borrow the kit for long enough to get a more solid idea because, damn, this is an absolute gem of VR's first commercial generation. I did a lot of comments about the things I had seen on the PC and comparing them to the PlayStation VR in this video, but keep in mind that most of those applied to games run through Vorpex on the PC, something that will always be a lot less efficient than first-party VR. I am definitely going to stick to PC-based VR because the first-party VR games on the Vive and the Rift obviously are superior to the PlayStations in graphical fidelity, tracking range, and other aspects. But that doesn't take away from the fact that PSVR impressed the absolute hell out of me in ways I just didn't expect to see. In the end, what do I think of this kit, and who do I think it's for? Well, to combine the answers, I think this kit is an excellent entry-level virtual reality system suitable for players who own a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 4 Pro and either don't own a PC at all or own a PC that's under spec for VR and don't wish to dish out additional money upgrading the system to be VR ready. Based on whatever hardware you already own, whether it be the PlayStation camera or the PlayStation Move controllers, you can spend as little as $230 US for the headset-only kit. In fact, while making this video, I spotted the core kit, which comes with a camera, for a mere $250 US. That is honestly the best deal I've ever seen for any entry-level VR kit. Ever. I know I brought this up a lot, but I have to bring it up one more time to stress it. Everything I played in this video was run off of vanilla PlayStation 4. The little machine that could. I'm simply baffled by how the developers managed to make their games work so damn well even on this system. I've heard a lot of people say it's inherently a requirement to have a pro to use PSVR, but after all this, I completely disagree. Sure, games like Resident Evil 7 must look about twice as good in a Pro, but based on what I saw from Borderlands 2 VR, the Pro is simply not a requirement in any way, not even inherently. If you only have a standard edition console, you will have plenty to do with the system. I may not be throwing myself in the store to buy one of these kits, but unlike when I borrowed the Pimax headset, this time around, PlayStation VR is a kit I wish I could keep for longer, and it's a kit I will definitely try to borrow again so I can try more stuff with it. If I ever get the chance to throw in a PlayStation 4 Pro in the mix, I'm expecting to end up spending another set of sessions, each several hours long, trying to dig as far as I can to see what that version of the console can pull off, because I'm already amazed. PlayStation have delivered what is simply excellent VR. Since the first moment I tried it for only a few minutes, it's been proving my assumptions wrong each time. Through Batman Arkham Knight, Skyrim VR, and everything I tried in today's video, it's kept proving to me that yes, VR not only will have a place in the console industry, it already has a great one right now. I do hope that the next iteration of the PlayStation has its own VR kit to go with it, and I'm hopeful that the Xbox line will also eventually reveal a VR kit of their own. The mid-generation consoles like the Xbox One X and PlayStation 4 Pro pack more than enough punch to handle VR at its basics, so I can only imagine that the next generation will be powerful enough to raise the bar on console-powered virtual reality. This video has, by the way, been a delight to make, notably because I got to play so many cool games on a system I was so intrigued by. Hopefully I've given you enough information to at least be intrigued too. You've been watching Stereo 3D Productions, and that's it for my first impressions of the PlayStation VR. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.